Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining today's episode of EnergySource Innovation Stream, series which spotlights innovators working to reshape the global energy system and accelerate the green transition. From Washington, my name is Paddy Ryan. I'm an assistant director at the Atlantic Council Global Energy Center, and it is my pleasure to be your host for today's episode. I'm delighted to be joined by Tristan Dodson, Chief Technology Officer at Diode. Diode connects businesses and consumers with intelligence that enables smoother, more rapid uptake of electric vehicles. By doing so, Diode closes the information gap that still slows the energy transition at the point of purchase. Diode works with the United Kingdom's prevailing paradigm of vehicle ownership to make clean energy allies out of employers. Before we jump in, a few reminders for our audience. First, this conversation is on the record and currently live streaming over YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. You can follow us on Twitter at AC Global Energy and using the hashtag AC Energy. We encourage you to share and post what you hear today. For those joining over Zoom, you can submit questions through the Q&A function on the app. I will try to get to as many of these as I can. If you are watching over one of our live streams, unfortunately, we cannot take your questions. With that, I'd like to give the floor to Tristan for his presentation.
Thank you very much, Paddy. Right, let me share my screen and I'll just get my slides up. There we go. Right, so yeah, thanks for the introduction, Paddy. So I am Tristan Dodson. I'm the Chief Technology Officer and co-founder of Diode. And here at Diode, we make software that drives a faster, easier journey to net zero. So a little bit of context for why we exist. So the UK is committed by law now to hitting net zero by 2050. This was introduced in 2019 in the Climate Change Act. And in doing so, in putting in this net zero target, the UK became the first major economy to actually legislate a net zero mandate. Subsequently, they've been joined by several others, quite a few others, in fact, because 80% of the world by GDP is now signed up to a net zero or a carbon neutrality target. Now, I think it's worth bearing in mind that 2050 is still sort of 30 or so years away, but of course that doesn't mean that we've got 30 years to act. Phasing in new technology takes a really long time. Which is why there are several interim targets that have been put in place in the UK, of which I just want to highlight three here, and that is by 2035, all new heating appliances must be low carbon, so that's basically heat pumps or hydrogen boilers. The electricity grid must be fully decarbonized, and all new cars and vans must be zero emission, so that is fully electric or hydrogen. Now, these interim targets are only 12 years away, which is obviously much nearer in the future. And I think there's obviously a big question of how are they actually going to be achieved. And to answer this, the UK government released their net zero strategy just over a year ago, which outlined their four key principles for how they're going to transition to net zero. And there's just one that I wanted to highlight, which is their first one, which is this that I've quoted here. And it's, we will work with the grain of consumer choice. No one will be required to rip out their existing boiler or scrap their current car. And the interpretation of this is that the government recognizes that they can't force net zero down people's throats. People need to be brought on side and they need support to make the transition. And that is where we see the major opportunity for Diode. So as we see it, the shift to net zero is going to create a smart energy ecosystem which will, of course, multiply the opportunity for energy consumers, but also make things a lot more complex, a lot more complicated. What we mean by this is that right now, an energy consumer basically has one consideration, which is what energy tariff should they use at home or a workplace if they're a business. But in the shift to net zero, these energy consumers are going to enter this smart energy ecosystem, and it's going to open them up to a whole host of other considerations around the technologies that they need to consider and adopt. So things like electric vehicles, EV chargers, smart tariffs, solar PV, battery storage, heat pumps, etc. Now, we see three key barriers in this transition to net zero, to this smart energy ecosystem. The first of which is assessing which combination of net zero tech to adopt is a highly individual problem. The second barrier is that people will typically face high upfront costs in order to adopt these new energy technologies. And the final barrier is that the combination of novel technologies and a fragmented market makes for a poor customer experience. And that is why we have created the Diode Charge Platform. So this is an all-in-one software platform that makes adopting net zero technologies a breeze. So the principle behind the platform I've outlined here with this diagram, but it's a streamlined user journey. So the first step, it starts with collecting and analyzing users' data, and this can be collected via surveys or collected by integrating existing data streams like from connected cars and smart meters. It then processes this data to create a personalized energy profile for those users and also for businesses. We're then able to use this energy profile to create and generate personalized recommendations for users, where we can identify the right combination of technologies that they need to minimize their CO2 emissions and energy costs. We then allow users to select those recommended technologies and actually facilitate the purchase of them via the platform. And then finally, we get the technologies installed via streamlined installation processes. The idea behind these is that it removes the bottlenecks, things like the surveying process. It therefore minimizes quoting time and cost. Now, whilst the end goal of Diode is to support a full range of different net zero technologies, the likes of your solar PV, your heat pumps, and your battery storage, we have very deliberately initially focused on electric vehicles. Now, the reasons for this are that, firstly, EVs are the largest market opportunity in the short term. The sector is maturing quickly and faster than the other net zero tech out there. Secondly, transitioning someone to an EV creates a smart energy customer of the future. An EV is often the first step that someone will take into this world. As an example, someone who's switches to an EV might suddenly then consider getting solar PV on a house because suddenly it makes financial sense to reduce their cost of charging. Thirdly, it allows us to take maximum advantage of the existing policies and subsidies that are out there to support and encourage EV adoption, and also means that we're actually very, very well placed to continue to provide the support needed as these subsidies are phased out and withdrawn, as they inevitably will be. And finally, helping with the adoption of EVs is what our partners need help with right now. And that is because of who we work with. So we have designed our charge platform to be used by partners so that they can use it with their own customers. Our partners in this case are anyone with an interest in the transition to electric vehicles. So this is the likes of vehicle leasing companies, energy companies, hardware infrastructure installers, who can then use the charge platform with their own customers. Initially, our primary focus, I would say, is looking at business customers. And this is because we see businesses as having a critical role in the transition of vehicles to electric. The reason for this is that in the UK, at least, 60% of new cars and vans are actually bought by businesses. Workplace charging is also, incredibly important for people that don't have access to home charging, so can unlock, an additional market share of people who would otherwise, would be unable to have an EV. And finally, in the UK, employees can use something called a salary sacrifice scheme to allow them to lease an electric vehicle, effectively tax-free through their employer. So this can mean, 20 to 40% saving, depending on their income and therefore their tax band, which is obviously a huge deal of money for people. Really, really helps with that, higher upfront cost of EVs. And this is set to become the next big growth area in the EV market share in the UK. However, the charge platform can also be used by retail consumers, by private car drivers, who will, of course, become increasingly important as the EV transition progresses. That's because, well, of course, they make up the other 40% of new car and van buyers, but they also make up the vast majority of used car buyers. And the used car market will become increasingly important as the whole fleet of vehicles transitions to electric. And secondly, private retail consumers, in a way, actually need more support than businesses, because they don't get access to the same financial incentives, the same salary sacrifice schemes and tax breaks that I mentioned just a minute ago. So how does the charge platform actually support EV adoption? Well, we like to describe it as a complete digital toolkit that educates drivers and makes them informed and educates them. So what do we mean by this? Well, for drivers and employees, we're able to provide personalized EV readiness reports, which can engage, educate, and empower individual drivers and employees. We've also got in the platform an advanced electric vehicle comparator that shows an individual exactly what it would be like for a specific model of EV to fit into their lifestyle. And drivers can also purchase home charge points and compare ancillary EV services, like things like community charging, smart charging apps, e-roaming, all in one place. So it provides them with a kind of complete journey to EV adoption. And then for businesses, we're able to show them, which of their employees and vehicles are EV ready, and create aggregated insights to show them things like, the overall CO2 savings and the impact on running costs that they will make as they start transitioning to EV. We also calculate for them the number of workplace charge points, the required charging infrastructure that they need to install over the next 5 years to help support the transition. And then finally, we provide an automated competitive tender process for them to actually purchase this workplace charging infrastructure, ensuring that they can do this at the lowest possible price. Now, what I thought I'd do at the end here is just to bring this to life, just to do a short demo of part of the platform. So I'm going to show you just very briefly our EV readiness report, which is here. So as I say, this report is something that any employee in a business or any private consumer is able to generate. All they need to do is a short 5-minute survey where we ask them questions about things like where they live, the current vehicle that they drive, their commuting patterns, a sample of trips that they make, as well as their ability to install a home charge point. It's very easy to do. It takes about 5 minutes, and instantly we generate for them this EV readiness report, which is everything that they need to know about what it would be like to drive an electric vehicle. First and foremost, it's an education piece. It's designed to inform these drivers so that when they next come to buy a car, they can make an informed decision about whether it's an electric one or not, and ensure that we dispel and combat any of the myths out there about EVs. So the first thing that we show them is just very, very plain English, whether they are ready to switch to an EV. And in this case, Wile E. Coyote here is ready to switch. And then we justify this assessment. So first thing that we show here is their access to charging. So we outline whether they can or can't install a home charge point, whether they will be able to charge at work and how often, and then also highlight their nearest public charge points. And that's both fast public charge points and rapid public charge points. Now, what we're showing here to the user is basically just the kind of top layer of the onion. We don't want to overload them with stats and figures and confuse them. But if they are interested in a particular area, they can click on these tiles and we provide more information. So in this case, we're saying here's information about public charging. We describe what fast public charging is, rapid public charging, and we also provide them with a public charging map centered on their home, and they can see where the nearest charge points are to where they live. Next up is their driving behavior. So we summarize their driving behavior into 3 key stats, and that is their average daily mileage, the furthest they're driving on 9 out of 10 days, and the percentage of time that their car sits there parked doing nothing. Now, the reason we do this is twofold. So the first reason is that it hopefully convinces them that they are seeing personalized information. We haven't just made this stuff up. And the second reason is that it hopefully surprises them, because there's a classic thing out there. People always overestimate how far they drive. And as a result, they think they need a 300, 400, 500 mile range car, whereas actually, they're rarely driving more than sort of 40 or 50 miles a day. Now, driving behavior is one thing, but what does that mean for EV ownership? This is where they can use our EV Suitability widget. And what we've got here is we allow the user to input a vehicle range, a rapid charging speed, as well as electricity and fuel prices. And then we've summarized EV ownership on the right-hand side here into these three key stats. So that is the frequency of regular charging, which is basically, overnight charging or charging at your routine usual location. The frequency that you'll need to use rapid charging, and that's when you're driving beyond the range of your vehicle in any given day. And then finally, the running cost savings compared to your current car. Now, this is all interactive. What a user is able to do is play around with these sliders, play around with these inputs, and all of these numbers update. So they can really get an understanding of, what is the difference between a 200-mile range EV and a 300-mile range EV. Probably worth mentioning here that when we ask for vehicle range, this is the advertised vehicle range, the official vehicle range that the manufacturer tells you about, which is much criticized as being highly inaccurate. We're fully aware of that. What we do is that we we do the calculations in the background to convert this official range, manufacturer's range, to a real world driving conditions. So the user doesn't need to do that themselves. They don't need to apply a rule of thumb or anything. We've done the calcs for them. Final 2 bits, and then I'll hand back over to questions, is we highlight the tax benefits. As I mentioned in my slides, this is really, really important, particularly in the UK, where tax benefits mean that people can save thousands of pounds on getting an electric vehicle through their employer. And this is because of this one here, benefit in kind tax rate of 2%. We've got a simple benefit in kind tax calculator that a user can play around with, where they can put in their income tax band, put in the purchase price of their current car and an electric SUV, and then we highlight the savings. And this is purely to show that, they can save 1,000, 2,000, even, 4,000 or 5,000 pounds a year in tax from getting an EV. And then finally, CO2 savings, classic myth out there that because you have to generate electricity with fossil fuels, that actually EVs don't save any CO2 compared to petrol or diesel cars. That's not the case when you run the numbers. So we've done that for the user, and we show them compared to their current car what they'd be saving if they were on a fully 100% renewable tariff and also using regular grid electricity as well. You can still make substantial savings in CO2. That's everything that I wanted to show. I'll hand over to Paddy to moderate any questions, which I'm very happy to take.
Thank you, Tristan, for that excellent demonstration. I'll remind our Zoom viewers that they are more than welcome to put any questions that they may have into the chat, but I'll begin with a question zeroing in on what makes the UK unique when it comes to EV deployment and procurement. Could you elaborate on the role of local authorities and employers?
Yep.
And how might the Diode charge platform look different if it were here in the US or elsewhere in Europe? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good question. So, I think in the UK, as I mentioned, there are very, very big incentives, tax breaks for getting EVs. This is increasingly being pushed more towards employers. So, we used to have grants for purchasing EVs here. Used to be grants for getting EV charge points. These are being phased out, and rightly so, because at some point the EV industry, the sector, has to stand on its own 2 feet. But where employers can make a massive difference is through these company car and salary sacrifice schemes, because you can provide your employees with a big financial incentive to go electric. The tax rates are guaranteed until 2025, and then up until 2028, they will increase by a very, very small amount. So, as a result, the most cost-effective way to get an EV right now is through your employer. I think, a question of local authorities, absolutely agree with you. Here in the UK, they have a really important part to play. They have very good relationships with the businesses in their areas, and they can provide things like test drives. They can provide, education from a trusted source. And I think, that last point is something that we firmly believe in. Education is the most cost-effective way to get people into electric vehicles and to help them transition to net zero. Because every time, there's a myth out there that prevails, that means that you have to financially incentivize someone to overcome that myth. But if you can do that in a non-financial way, it's obviously a much more cost-effective method. In terms of the rest of the world, I don't think the UK is alone. There are plenty of other countries, particularly in Europe, that also offer similar tax breaks for EVs. And you've seen that it can work very effectively in a country like Norway, where they have very, very expensive registration taxes for cars. They removed them for EVs, and Norway was way ahead of every other country in the world in terms of EV adoption. Other countries are now following suit, you can certainly see that in the uptick data that we are now hitting the mass market.
Great, thank you, Tristan. And my second question, we're getting a lot of questions about this in the Zoom chat, kind of on how current energy market developments impact the business case for electric vehicles, and particularly in the UK. Electricity prices are rather high. There's some uncertainty about the future of the energy price cap. Might this current energy crisis in Europe make traditional internal combustion engine vehicles a better economic proposition than EVs? And if so, what other benefits might there be for consumers and employers to go electric?
Yeah, very good question. To be completely honest, it is a big challenge at the moment, and I think it will become a bigger challenge next year. For those that don't know, in the UK, electricity prices have increased significantly. So they have more than doubled over the last year. As a result, the government have introduced some protection for consumers. So they've capped the price of energy. Without that protection, they would have gone up even more. We are approaching a point where it is becoming harder to make a financial argument for EVs, looking at purely a sort of vehicle purchase and running cost decision. The cost per mile for running an EV is now only slightly lower than what it is for an efficient gasoline or diesel car. And it is quite possible that next year, if we have falling oil prices, that gap could close entirely. I think, though, what is really, really important to bear in mind is that this is a short-term shock, or hopefully a short-term shock. And even for someone buying an EV next year, over the lifetime that they will own that vehicle, 3-4 years, you would hope and expect that running cost gap would open back up again. But I think on top of that, it's also really important to highlight the other things, the other advantages that person, individual is able to get from switching to an EV. So the first is that cheap electricity is available. So if you are willing to do smart charging, you can access off-peak electricity in the UK, which is significantly cheaper, and is very convenient for people because it's normally overnight when they're sleeping anyway. The second thing is, obviously, as I mentioned, highlighting the tax benefits that can still make EVs very cost effective on a total cost of ownership basis. And then the final point is that it shouldn't be seen as a disadvantage to switch to an electric vehicle. It's not a compromise. For a lot of people, this is actually a really, really convenient piece of tech, because you never have to drive to a gas station again. If you have access to charging at home or at work, you barely even need to think about your recharging schedule. You can just sort of top up, and most of the time you will have a sort of full tank, as it were. And I think, when you start talking about it like that and positioning it like that, people will look less at the economics of it and understand that what they're doing here is they're considering a balance between the costs of the vehicle and also the convenience rather than the inconvenience.
Right. Yeah, very excellent point. Sort of a follow-up, I suppose I'll move from the operational costs of the EV to the upfront consumer costs. Notably, we've seen other energy market volatility in terms of the critical minerals and critical raw materials needed for EV manufacturing, volatile prices for lithium, rare earths, cobalt, and others. How could this volatility impact the market for EVs? Should we expect more volatility in the prices faced by consumers when they want to go electric?
Well, I think, we have to be alive to the fact that there will be volatility in commodity prices. And we're seeing it at the moment, not caused by commodity prices, but, there are big supply issues for all cars, but, particularly electric vehicles that we're seeing in the UK and the rest of Europe. As a result, it is pushing up prices and making lead times very long for these cars. I think, just on that point, one of the sort of quite positive indicators is that despite the fact that lead times are very long for new electric vehicles at the moment, they're remaining long because people are still signing up to get their vehicle. There is still a lot of unmet demand out there. I think longer term, it is quite possible that there will be supply shortages for these raw materials. I've seen estimates that the reserves of lithium may start to struggle around 2030. But I think, rather than highlighting this as a reason for why, we can never transition to EVs, I think it's more identifying that it's a challenge. It's a challenge that needs to be solved either through identifying more reserves for these commodities, switching to different raw materials if it's all possible with different battery technologies, and also looking really, really seriously at things like battery recycling. We're not talking about a consumable here. We're talking about a material that once mined can technically be used indefinitely. That is something that, yes, understood right now, hard to think about because there aren't that many used batteries out there. But in 10, 15 years' time, it's something that definitely needs to be high up the agenda.
Yeah, excellent point, Tristan. And with that, I'm afraid our time is now unfortunately at a close. So I would now like to thank everyone for tuning in today. And thank you especially to you, Tristan, for your presentation on Diode's cutting-edge platform and your invaluable insights on this important and growing market. We're excited to. We're very excited to keep up with Diode's work moving forward. I would also like to thank everyone who helped put this event together, including Amaya Haddad, Dan Lawrence Eyre, Mackenzie Clark, Graham McGillivray, sorry, I messed up your name, Graham, and Jackson Styron. If you would like to rewatch this event, a cached replay will be available on the Atlantic Council's Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter accounts. We encourage you to share with colleagues and friends. That's all for now. We hope to see you again next time. Take care.